Hey, I'm Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a really fun fall craft idea for you guys. I'm gonna show you how I made this adorable pumpkin blanket using my Cricut and my Cricut heat press. So if that's a craft that you're interested in, just keep watching and I'm gonna get right into it. What you'll need for this project is heat transfer vinyl, your Cricut heat press, a protective mat, parchment paper or a Teflon sheet, and a blanket. For the blanket, I do recommend one that's going to be very tightly threaded because the heat transfer vinyl will have a hard time sticking to anything that's very loose. I'm going to link the blanket that I'm using down below. I did buy it from Amazon, but it did take me a while to go through and look at the material and the style of the blanket to see which one would be best for this project. So first, I laid out my blanket and just roughly measured about how big I wanted the pumpkins to be. So first, you have to actually create your design. So I'm going to go into Design Space, go over to Images, and search for pumpkin. And I was between these two, but I really like the one with the little swirly stem. I think it just gives it a little bit extra character. So I'm gonna be going with that one. I made the pumpkins all 3.5 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate them until I can create a row. I'm duplicating that row and then I'm flipping them all horizontally because I'm going to be placing them on the blanket facing different directions in a pattern so that way it gives it a little bit more depth. And I actually am just going to add 2 more pumpkins so I can fill up the entire space on my mat because we're all about saving as much vinyl as we possibly can here. I'm turning the mirror on for both of my mats, but when you go to select everyday iron on, it does turn it on automatically, so if you forget, hopefully it won't be totally messed up. So I'm unraveling my vinyl and applying it on the mat so that way I could gauge how much vinyl I need because again, for the orange, I'm going to be using the entire mat. And as always, with heat transfer vinyl, I'm placing it shiny side down on my mat. And using my brayer tool, I'm just going to gently roll over my vinyl to get out any air bubbles or wrinkles. Now it's time to turn on my Cricut and get to work. Then I'm just inserting my mat into my Cricut and having my Cricut cut out the pumpkin designs. I will be making a lot more pumpkins, but I'm just doing this amount to start and then gauging how many I need from there. Flipping my mat upside down, I'm removing my vinyl from my mat. And I'm going to repeat this process with the stems. I'm going to cut out all this excess vinyl and I'm going to cut all of the stems and the pumpkins out one by one and weed them. And it's gonna look a little something like this, except I'm gonna be ironing the pumpkin part on first. So I actually wound up putting my blanket on my dining room table because it was gonna be impossible for me to work on my desk with this giant blanket. So I wound up just measuring about 2 inches from the edge, like right before where the fringe was, to give a little bit of space on the end before I put my pumpkin. I'm turning my mini heat press on at its lowest heat and just trying to iron out any of the really big wrinkles on the blanket. This kind of worked. Honestly, I think you could maybe either skip this step or I think a bigger heat press would probably be helpful if you're trying to get all of these wrinkles out. I honestly didn't really think it was an issue for me because I'm just applying such small pieces of vinyl. But if you're really worried about it, I would do a larger heat press. But I was scared to bring out my large heat press because I didn't want to ruin my table. Here I'm making sure that the pumpkins are going to be about 2 inches from the edge on either side, and I'm aligning the pumpkins up all along the bottom as far as I could get because part of the blanket was hanging off the table. And I also am making sure that they're evenly distanced. It was about like 5.2 inches in between each pumpkin. And like I said before, I'm flipping them. I'm going to alternate the pumpkins between facing different directions so that way it doesn't just like look all the same. This by far took the longest, was placing all of the pumpkins and making sure that they were evenly spaced. I mean, like as evenly spaced as you possibly could. I don't think they're ever going to be perfect, but I didn't want it to be like glaringly obvious that they weren't spaced properly. So this definitely took the longest, but I aligned as many as I could. And then I'm like, you know what? I gotta start getting to work. So after an excruciatingly long amount of time measuring all these pumpkins, I slid my heat protecting mat underneath the blanket. I did this as carefully as I possibly could, lifting the blanket up while sliding the mat under. The pumpkins shifted a little bit, so I have to go in and fix them, but it really wasn't that big of a deal. They were still in like the general area that I'm gonna have them. And then I'm starting off with level 2 heat of my mini heat press. I just didn't want it to be too hot in case it burned the blanket. I'm going to apply firm and even pressure over the parchment paper first. And then I removed the parchment paper and applied some more heat and pressure for a few more seconds, especially along the corners and like the edges of the pumpkin. Before I removed the plastic completely, I just lifted it up a little bit to see if it needed a little bit more heat, and it did. So I just went right back in with my mini heat press and applied more heat and pressure, and then let it cool again, and then removed the plastic. And then I'm applying the stem, and same process, putting the parchment paper on top and applying heat and pressure to the stem. But this time I'm making sure that I'm using the pointy edge of my heat press because I don't want to accidentally slip and go over any part of the vinyl that I had put on in the pumpkin part, because it will burn the vinyl. And like before, I'm going in again without the parchment paper and just really pushing down on the edges that are not going to stick as well, and just making sure that I don't venture outside of that stem that I'm doing because I don't want to burn my vinyl. And I'm repeating this whole process all the way up the blanket, making sure to alternate between which way the pumpkin is facing, and then also the rows of pumpkins. So the way I did it was at the bottom, I had a longer row of pumpkins, and then the row above that is going to be the pumpkins that are in between the negative spaces, and then the row above that is going to be back to the longer row of pumpkins, so that it looks all nice and neat and cohesive, but they're not all facing the same way. It got a lot easier about halfway through when I had my routine down and I knew how the spacing was going to be. Once I got like further into it, it got a lot easier. It did take a very long time. It took me about like 7 hours, but I also was filming and I took a break to eat dinner. So yes, if you're gonna be doing this project, especially if you're using the size that I did, it will take a while, but I really think it's worth it in the end because once all of the pumpkins are on, it looks so nice. Like this literally looks like something you could get in a store, and I'm very happy about it. This is the first time I've ever made a blanket like this, and I think it turned out really, really nice. And heat transfer vinyl is washable, so if you have to wash it, you can. I would just be very careful, put it on a delicate cycle, and I would not put this in the dryer. I would just air dry it. So yeah, I think this is like the perfect fall craft for yourself, or you could use this in your home. You could also use this as a gift, especially around the holidays. Instead of like pumpkins, you could do candy canes. You could do like ghosts and bats and make it Halloween themed rather than fall. I just think this is a great idea, and I would love to know if you guys wind up trying this out for yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you want to see more crafting content from me, just subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell so you get notified when I post a new video. And if you want to follow me on my other socials, everything is linked in the description below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!